What I'd like to say to start with is that what has driven me as the energy minister over this last year and a half is what's best for the ratepayer of British Columbia. How can we acquire the power that we need at the least cost possible? And the answer turned out to be the Site C project, and we'll go through how what supports that statement. I do also want to tell you that, or perhaps remind you that the cost of electricity in this province is one of our competitive advantages. We have the third lowest residential rates in North America. We have the fourth lowest commercial and industrial rates in North America, and that sets BC apart from not only many provinces but many states, and it's important that we maintain that. And so this decision helps us maintain that competitive edge. And I think the third and final thing I want to say just in getting started here is that we would not build anything, frankly, if we didn't need to. Hydro has assessed the demand over the next 20 years at 40%. They're going to meet 78% of that through conservation. So I think that obviously is a very aggressive goal, and I'm going to talk about all of those points that I just made as we go through. So thank you very much for coming. As I say, today the Premier will announce that government has decided to proceed with the Site C Clean Energy Project. I'm here today to review the results of government's due diligence, which resulted in first of all, an updated capital cost estimate for Site C, as well as the establishment of something called a project reserve. Our due diligence involved extensive consultation with the independent power industry, and concluded that Site C was the best way to keep our growing need for electricity while keeping rates low. So as I said, today's residential rates are the third lowest in North America, fourth lowest for commercial and industrial customers. We brag about that, we're pleased about that, but it's nothing assures us of maintaining that competitive advantage. It doesn't happen just all by itself. We have to make choices as a government, and the utility has to make choices that will ensure that we maintain that competitive advantage. And again, that's what Site C is largely about. I believe that this decision today puts ratepayers first and makes sure that we'll maintain our competitive advantage on electricity rates. We take our system for granted. I think we probably all agree with that. We go and we turn the lights on and turn the television on and the computer and don't really think much about it. It just kind of ticks along, but we should actually be proud of how well our system works. There are 77,000 kilometers of transmission lines out there and over this vast and challenging terrain here in BC. You hear about brownouts just about anywhere else in North America. You don't hear about brownouts in British Columbia. We should be proud of that. The system actually works fairly well. 93%, or actually a little better than 93% of our electricity is clean. People want clean energy today, and over 93% of our electricity in this province is clean. So our goal in making this announcement is to keep the system reliable, keep it clean. That means that we have to plan ahead. We have to make investments today that are going to meet our needs, help us meet our needs in the future. So I said a second ago, demand for electricity in the province will grow by 40% over the next 20 years. That's based on an analysis by Hydro that using stats from Stats Canada and BC Stats and other sources of information that our population will grow by 1.1 million over the next 20 years. Also based on the fact that if you look around and you look around at what your kids are doing, we're using a whole lot more electricity today than we did even 5 years ago with PVRs and big screen TVs and cell phones and everything else that we tend to charge up on a regular basis. It's also based on the fact that our economy is growing, and we expect our economy to continue growing. And we think all three classes or categories of ratepayer will continue to expand: residential, commercial, and large industrial. There will be new technologies that we know will need more electricity, like electric vehicles. Now, if you look at this particular slide, you see the solid red line shows the growth in demand. And when you get to the vertical line, that's obviously now. You see the green dotted line or the red dotted line, that is the 40% growth over 20 years. That's what that red dotted line signifies. The green dotted line signifies the actual demand that we'll need from new generation after conservation. So conservation makes a very considerable difference to the story. I've already said we wouldn't build Site C if we didn't need to. We wouldn't actually be out doing, whether it's natural gas or whether it's IPPs or whether it's Site C. We wouldn't do any of it if we didn't need to. And our first choice again is to reduce the demand through conservation. That'll help us keep rates down and keep costs down. Through the PowerSmart program, and I've got folks here from BC Hydro who can talk to you about that. They are quite serious about achieving that goal of 78%, which means that of the 40% that we think we're going to need over the next 20 years, we're going to get 22% of it from Site C. When Site C is built, just so we have it in perspective, Site C will produce about 8% of the overall system electricity in the province. So it's big. It's expensive, it's a huge project, but it's 8% of the total electricity needs required in the province. Our electricity comes from many different sources. You can see that the Heritage Hydro is the foundation of our system. You can also see from this slide that the IPP industry provides about 25% of our electricity needs in the province. The role that IPPs will play going forward, I think, will be very significant. After Site C is built, the Clean Energy Act makes it very clear that there won't be any other major dams constructed in this province. There will have to be other ways to supply new electricity, and that's where the renewable sector will come in. Some folks have questioned, do we need the electricity? Do we need it when BC Hydro says we need it? BC Hydro, their methodology for forecasting demand has been examined by the BCUC on a number of occasions, and BCUC has indicated that it is state of the art. But not to be satisfied with that, Hydro went out and retained a gentleman by the name of Mark Gilbert, who has over 33 years of experience, most recently at the American Energy Power, or AEP, which has 5 million customers serves 5 million customers through 7 electric operating companies doing business in 11 states. He's an acknowledged expert in terms of forecasting demand, and Mr. Gilbert has also confirmed that BC Hydro's forecasting methods are state of the art. They're as good as they get. The next slide will show you the options that we considered over mostly the past year, but really since we were elected in 2013, we have been looking at all of these options. Wanted to say a few things about natural gas, because sometimes people suggest that, why don't you just use natural gas? You've got lots of it, and right now it's cheap, and wouldn't that be better? What I can tell you is that if we were to use natural gas, we would have to change the Clean Energy Act, because it requires us to have at least 93% clean electricity in the province. It is our view in government that the public would prefer that we not use fossil fuels to generate a large part of our electricity. We do some of that today. It's good, solid, firm electricity. But we think that clean, green electricity is really what the public wants. So that's one of the reasons that we dismissed the natural gas option, but it's not the only reason. No one knows 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, the life of Site C is probably 100 years, what gas is going to cost. Nobody knows that. And we've done a lot of due diligence on this, and you're just, you're guessing to try to determine what gas would actually cost in the out years. You're also guessing on what carbon's going to cost. We don't know what carbon's going to cost over the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years. So there's a lot of risk involved with natural gas. Market purchases, we could just go to the spot market and purchase electricity. I suppose there is a great deal of uncertainty to ratepayers around that. It's not It's not something BC has ever done in the past, and it's not something that we want to do going forward. A quick note on geothermal. The geothermal folks, their association, had some comments in the recent past. What I can tell you about geothermal is that of all the renewables, it has the attractive feature of being a firm electricity. Once you find it and you're able to harness it and start using it, it's like coal and gas and big hydro. It's firm electricity. However, it has proven to be very elusive in terms of finding the right kind of resource. We have had companies who have acquired permits from government. We've issued 12 permits for geothermal. We've had one company spend, I think, in the order of $30 million on their project unsuccessfully. They were not able to identify the kind of geothermal resource that could actually produce electricity. So there is no possible way that geothermal could be the answer to our prayers at the present time, but it definitely is a resource that we want to help come to the fore in the future and allow us here in British Columbia to determine whether or not geothermal can play the same kind of role that it does play in some places like Iceland. So that left us with two options, Site C or a suite of independent power projects, and if we chose the suite of independent power projects, because it's intermittent energy, it would have to be backed up with a source of firm energy like natural gas. This is an important slide. What this shows you is that Site C is the third project on the Peace River, and I know you know that, but that has, I think, special implications for this whole discussion. Site C will be able to take advantage of the storage in the Williston Reservoir, which is obviously much larger than the reservoir for Site C. It is a unique opportunity for British Columbia, a unique opportunity for BC Hydro to have two dams on a river, to have a huge reservoir, a huge battery that can actually assist Site C in generating its electricity. So you can generate 35% of the electricity that's generated at the WAC Bennett Dam with 5% of the environmental footprint through the Site C project. One of the, I think, unique advantages of this project is the fact that you've got this huge reservoir to call upon, and frankly, it puts Site C in a position, I think, from a competitive point of view, where it is next to impossible, I think, for any other option to compete with it. But it is the last one, and we don't have any other shelf-ready Site Cs hanging around out there where you've got a river already dammed up and where you've got the opportunity to avail yourself of such a large reservoir. So Site C will be the source of affordable, reliable, and clean electricity for more than 100 years, and that's an important point as well. It's a proven, firm, dependable source of energy in this province. It's there to meet peak demand, even on the coldest, darkest days and nights, or even when in the Okanagan they need their, or somewhere else in the province they need their air conditioners running. That power will come from Site C as it comes from our other large hydroelectric assets, and you just can't say the same thing about wind or sun or run of the river, which is so dependent on the spring freshet. All these intermittent sources need to be backed up by dependable energy that is always available. The firm energy from Site C will increase the amount of intermittent energy that the BC Hydro system can support going forward. So you build Site C, you end up with 1,100 megawatts of firm capacity. You then have more opportunity to use intermittent electricity going forward. Site C will also produce the lowest GHG emissions along with the renewables that I've mentioned. They're on the same plane with solar, wind, and geothermal. And Site C during construction is going to produce or create 10,000 direct construction jobs. So speaking of jobs, we will need a lot of workers to build Site C. We think that's a very positive thing, and it's a better problem to have to be searching for workers than jobs for those workers. It actually will provide lots of well-paid jobs, lots of opportunities for workers. Question is, and some of you have asked this question, Do we have enough skilled workers to build both Site C and the infrastructure for the LNG industry? It's a question that we needed to answer to the best of our ability, and we think we have done that. You'll have an opportunity to ask about this in a minute or two. BC Hydro has worked very closely with the Ministry of Jobs, Tourism and Skills Training. Shirley Bond has done a lot of work personally on the comparison of the two projects and what types of skill sets we're going to need for LNG versus Site C. There have been a number of different training institutions and industry associations that have been involved in this analysis as well. And the conclusion of all of this work is that the labor requirements for Site C and LNG are actually quite different. While the workforce for Site C will be weighted towards heavy equipment operators moving large volumes of materials, more like a mining operation, the LNG industry has a much greater reliance on skilled trades. As a result, the labor requirements for Site C are not expected to interfere with the LNG industry. BC Hydro recognizes the opportunity to hire locally. There have been, as you know, some coal mines that have gone into care and maintenance in the Northeast, not far from this project. Many of those people are skilled in the right areas, and there will be opportunities for them and for other folks, particularly First Nations folks who live in the Northeast. And the strategy that BC Hydro has employed around the labor issue is to, as much as possible, hire Aboriginal and hire local. To increase the availability of local labor, BC Hydro has invested in a number of skills and trades training programs already. Lots that you don't know about, and I won't go through all of the specifics, but they have programs with Northern Lights College Foundation. They've got a Northern Opportunities pre-apprenticeship program. They've got something called the Northeast Native Advancing Society to support trades training. They've worked with School District 60 to support a career counselor position to encourage students to go into the trades. They've worked with the College of New Caledonia to support students in the heavy equipment operator training program. So they're already engaged and already working towards training and in particular making sure that people who live in the North get the opportunities. So what you probably, well, I shouldn't presuppose I know what's on your mind, but I suspect that the budget is on everyone's mind, and so let me say a few things about the budget. The Site C capital cost estimate of $7.96 billion was developed in 2010. It included all construction, development, inflation, and interest costs, as well as contingencies. That bottom-up estimate was completed by a team of internal and external engineering and construction experts. It underwent an external peer review by KPMG to validate the methodologies and the assumptions. In 2014, there was a cost refresh that was done with KPMG. The refresh showed that while some costs had increased due to factors like such as a longer environmental assessment process, enhancements to worker accommodation, larger diversion tunnels, they concluded that the original cost estimate remained appropriate, as these increases were largely offset by savings from lower than anticipated interest rates. Interest rates make a big difference to the cost of the project, and efficiencies in project design and reduced excavation requirements. KPMG reviewed the 2014 cost refresh and concluded that, and I quote, "The level of care and diligence was consistent with an infrastructure project about to enter construction phase, that reasonable and appropriate processes were followed for developing the assumptions used in the financial model, and that the methodology behind the cost estimate was appropriate." That direct construction cost estimate was also reviewed by an independent panel of contractors. I should say there's a representative of KPMG here today who will stay behind. The independent panel of contractors also has a representative here today who will stay behind. The individuals on that independent panel of contractors have between 35 and 50 years of experience each in management and construction of major projects. They know as much about major construction as anybody. They concluded, and I quote, "The capital cost estimate was sufficient for the proposed scope and schedule of the project, that it contained an appropriate level of accuracy for making a final investment decision and a level of detail comparable to a private sector contractor estimate, and that the contingency was sufficient to cover any reasonable cost increases." And I say all this because we are still after, in my case, a year and a half of talking about this project, still convinced that the original base budget of $7.96 billion is a solid budget. In addition to what I just told you in terms of oversight and scrutiny, we brought the Ministry of Finance into the picture and enabled them to go through the budget with a fine-tooth comb. And they did so, and there was an exhaustive process involving the Ministry of Finance and Treasury Board and anybody who really wanted to take a crack at poking holes in this budget. What I can tell you, without putting too fine a point on it, is that we have not been able to poke holes in the $7.96 billion budget. It is solid. Now, it's government's turn, I guess, to to decide. Okay, are we going to go with this $7.96 billion budget, or are we going to do something a bit different in the interest of being prudent and to manage perhaps what might be characterized as unforeseen risk? So we've done three things. The first thing that we did was BC Hydro had intended to get the cost of going from the HST world to the PST world paid for in their contingency fund. We decided that it would be more prudent to have that cost included in the capital budget very transparently up front, just put it on the top of the $7.96 billion. So that's the first thing that we did. The second thing that we did was bearing in mind that the 2014 refresh contemplated a construction start of January 2015, we have worked with Hydro, and Hydro has agreed with government that it would be more prudent to start construction in the summer of 2015, and there are several reasons for that. But there's also a cost to that. There's a cost to delaying commencement of construction. So when you take those two things that government has decided, the cost of the change from HST to PST and the cost of delaying commencement of construction, you end up with a budget of $8.335 billion. Now, I said that there were three things that government decided to do. The third thing that government decided to do, and it was government in collaboration with BC Hydro agrees with government that this is a very prudent thing to do. Given that it's 8 years for construction, given that this is obviously a mega project in terms of its costs, we believe together, government and BC Hydro, that this project should have a project reserve. The project reserve is $440 million. It's for unforeseen events that are outside BC Hydro's control, such as higher than expected inflation and higher than forecast interest. If you're saying to yourself right now, well, why wouldn't that be in the regular contingency? It is actually in the contingency. What we're talking about with this forecast allowance are events that, like the 2008 crash, that nobody predicts, that can happen over an 8-year period. And government wanted to be very, very prudent to the point of careful, cautious, and that's why we suggested this project reserve. That project reserve will be held by the Ministry of Finance. It will only be accessible to BC Hydro if BC Hydro comes to Treasury Board and makes a submission that would justify a release of a portion of that project reserve. I will tell you, and I think BC Hydro will want to say this as well. Their budget, the 7.96, has been kicked around and tested a lot, including by government, and no one was able to poke any major holes in that budget. We have now added the cost of delay, and we've asked Hydro to include the cost of HST to PST on top of the capital budget. That gets you to the 8.335. Hydro will tell you that they intend to build this project for $8.335 billion, and we obviously want them to and wish them well, and we're going to stay engaged, and they will be reporting regularly to the Ministry of Finance. They will also be reporting regularly, at least on a quarterly basis, as I understand it, to the BCUC, throughout the construction phase. So that was the budget. What about BC Hydro's debt? The net incremental increase to BC Hydro's forecast debt is approximately $6.4 billion. That obviously doesn't jibe with the 8.335 or the 8.775. That is because government will take less dividends while the project is being constructed, so that BC Hydro's debt to equity ratio can be maintained. It's also because the project has some sunk costs already on BC Hydro's books. But back to the dividends, you remember in November of 2013, we announced what we called the 10-year rates plan, and we said government's going to take less from BC Hydro, and it seemed like a long ways away. It's not really that far away. The fact that government is taking less, that essentially they need to earn much less net income and pay fewer dividends. The fact that their net income now is tied to inflation instead of being tied to the value of the assets that they add to the corporation. That all makes a huge difference to the amount of money that they need to borrow for this project. I should also, just to put this in context, in that 10-year rates plan, we also announced in this press seater in November, I think November 23rd, 2013, that Hydro would be spending $1.7 billion a year to upgrade its existing system. So when you take that $1.7 billion and you add what they'll be investing in BC Hydro, it works out to about $2.4 billion a year in capital investment by BC Hydro. So I think I've tried to cover demand, budget, and the BC Hydro debt. I want to switch to what I think is the most important issue certainly for government, and that is the cost of ratepayers. As I started out here today, that what has driven this largely has been how can we deliver the electricity that we're going to need in this province for the least costs possible. So the BC Hydro developed its business case and its argument for the environmental approval process. If you recall, the joint review panel process started in January of 2013. They had literally tens of thousands of pages of evidence, and one of the things they had to do was they had to determine what the cost of electricity would be from Site C, and they did that based on a pre-10-year rates plan analysis. After the environmental assessment process ended, the joint review panel process ended, and the two environmental certificates were granted, Hydro then applied the 10-year rates plan, the things that I just talked about that have changed around dividend and net income, and also Tier 3 water rentals, and came up with a different cost of energy. Under I said this already, but it's complicated, so it's probably worth repeating. Under the 10-year plan, net income is now tied to inflation starting in 2018, rather than a deemed percentage of the value of assets and service. I don't know if everybody is aware of this, but Hydro essentially was told for many, many years to generate income on the basis of what they owned. So the more they invested, the more net income they had to show, and that was a cost to the ratepayer, and we have changed that. We've also changed the amount of dividends that Hydro would pay to the government. So the process that they used pre-10-year rates plan with the joint review panel led them to conclude that electricity would cost $83 a megawatt hour. If and when you factor in the 10-year rates plan, you actually decrease that amount by $26 a megawatt hour for the cost of electricity from Site C. It is obviously very, very considerable. You'll have an opportunity to have that explained by people who are better with the policy and the math than I am. There is also the issue, as I mentioned, of the Tier 3 water rentals. We announced a year ago, it's right there in black and white, that we're getting rid of the Tier 3 water rentals. That makes a further difference to the energy cost of $1. So you got $26 from the change to net revenue or net income and dividends, and $1 from the elimination of Tier 3 water rentals. So obviously, the 10-year rates plan reduces the cost of power from Site C considerably. But you've also got the higher capital costs that I just told you about. So the higher capital costs, the $8.335 billion will add about $2.25 to the cost of electricity. So we're taking some off, the 26 bucks, the $1. We're adding back on $2.25 for the higher capital cost. And if BC Hydro dips into that project reserve to the full amount available, the full $440 million, you would add another $2.50 to the cost of that electricity from Site C. So when you do the math, the cost to ratepayers of energy from Site C goes from $83, which was the Joint Review Panel number, to $58 a megawatt hour. And if the full reserve is used, up to $61 a megawatt hour. The cost of electricity from Site C is still far below what any other option showed us in our deliberations over the past year. So what if we did acquire the new power that we need, that 1,100 megawatts of capacity? How much would it cost ratepayers? In the IRP, the Integrated Resource Plan that Hydro put out about a year ago, they considered the cost of IPP energy to be in the range of $96 a megawatt hour. I spent a lot of time, and my staff spent a lot of time with the clean energy industry over the past 6-8 months especially. We concluded extensive consultations with the independent power industry. We did want to make sure that our analysis reflected recent advances in technology and efficiency. We know the price of wind, for example, is coming down. We know that. We agree with that. Has it come down enough to be competitive with Site C? No, it hasn't. But we did work with them a lot, and as a result of that, we concluded that we would use a different number for the cost of IPP power. Instead of using the $96 that's in the Integrated Resource Plan, we would use $85 a megawatt hour. And I've told some of you this story, but I'll tell it again because I haven't told everybody. I did have a meeting with about a dozen very senior independent power executives, mostly CEOs, some CFOs, here in this building not that long ago. And I can tell you that there are many CEOs in that business who will tell you they can't generate electricity for $85 a megawatt hour. The only area right now, and this will change over time, hopefully, the only area of the IPP industry today that is even close to that is wind, because the cost of the technology has come down. But when you look at wind, the best wind resource, the only place where you're going to get the kind of wind that you need to get your price down is in the Northeast. So that's probably where the next wind farms will go. But they're still not competitive with Site C because, as I said earlier, Site C is a unique project. It's going to last 100 years. You get to amortize the cost over a long, long period of time. When you pay the upfront cost of the project off, you've got this asset that just continues to generate electricity for decades and decades and decades, just the same as our hydroelectric facilities that WAC Bennett built back decades ago. Impact on ratepayers of Site C or IPPs. There are some complicating factors, and I think this is an opportunity for me to tell you about a few of them. To be completely transparent with you, when we did the analysis, you can't just look at the cost of generating the electricity on site, Site C, or whether it's a wind farm. There's a cost to deliver that energy to customers, both for Site C and for the IPPs, and we factored that in. There's also a cost, however, that's associated with IPPs because they're intermittent. They're not always available. There's two things. One thing I mentioned earlier, you need to back up IPP energy that's intermittent, and it right now is all intermittent. If the wind isn't blowing, the water isn't running through the turbine in the run of the river, the sun isn't shining, you still want your electricity. Everybody still wants their electricity. So hydro actually has to have something that will back that up, because when that's not providing energy, they have to provide it from some other source. So there is a cost when the IPP industry states that they can generate electricity for a certain price, and they can't generate it for as low as Site C. But when they're talking about the value of their industry, and I like their industry, and I think their industry has a bright, bright future in British Columbia. I believe that, and I'll tell you why I think that later if you want me to. there's still a cost to backing up that intermittent electricity. So we had to factor that in. And the second thing that we had to factor in is we trade electricity in this province. You've all heard of PowerX. You all know the fact that PowerX, generally speaking, other than an incident in the 1990s, PowerX makes money for the BC ratepayers. It makes at least $100 million a year, sometimes a lot more than that. We're able to trade electricity because we can store water behind big dams and release it when the price is up. We can release it when Alberta needs it. We can release it when Washington needs it, or Oregon. If you've got intermittent electricity, you can't do that. So there is a cost in terms of the lack of opportunity for trading that also affects the cost, the analysis, I guess, the comparison of IPP power and Site C. So when you account for these three factors, you end up with a final cost to ratepayers for Site C of, let's say, $64 to $67 a megawatt hour, and for IPPs between $110 and $130 a megawatt hour. So as I said, large hydro projects are cost effective because after the upfront capital costs, they have low operating costs. They last for about 100 years or more. Their cost to ratepayers decrease over time. Today, the cost of electricity produced by BC Hydro's large hydroelectric facilities is far lower than the rate that residential customers pay for the electricity. We are all benefiting from the decisions that were made 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. They were decisions that are exactly like the one that we're making today. And there's always impact. There's always going to be impact from any large project. But this project is in the best interest of the province. It's in the best interest of ratepayers. It is a decision that I think government has to make, and it's frankly a decision that we're proud to make, despite the fact that there are impacts to folks that live in the Northeast, and no one is happy about that, and we will definitely do everything we can, and Hydro will do everything they can to mitigate those impacts. But this is a decision, I think, for the elected people of the BC government to make. It is a decision that will have a positive impact in this province for decades and decades to come. We calculate that over the first 50 years of Site C operations, taxpayers will pay an average of $650 million to $900 million less each year compared to a portfolio of IPPs. There will be people who will argue with that number. Those are large numbers. There is a very significant savings that ratepayers will achieve year after year after year as a result of making this decision. Ratepayers are going to save approximately 6 to 8% the average household as a result of this decision. It is absolutely clear that to put ratepayers first and keep rates low, this is the option that we need to choose. I do want to repeat something I've said a couple times already, that I say that this is the cheapest source of the new electricity that we're going to need over the next 20 years. But again, this is the last project of this unique type that we have in the province. And I believe that going forward, the clean energy industry, the wind, the run of the river, the solar, the tidal, the bioenergy, the geothermal, there will be lots and lots of opportunities for that industry. We're proud to have that industry in the province, and I believe that there will be lots of opportunity for them going forward. Aboriginal engagement, obviously something that we care a lot about and think a lot about. Myself and colleagues like John Rustad have been in the Northeast in the last year and a half meeting with First Nations, and we know that they are currently, as a group, the Treaty 8 First Nations currently as a group are opposed to the project. I would suggest that the level of opposition is different as between the individual First Nations, but it's not for me to comment any more on that. I know that during the joint review panel process, there was an opinion offered by the panel about the Federal Provincial Consultation and Accommodation Report, and I quote, "There has been meaningful consultation with the potentially affected Aboriginal groups, and consultation has been carried out in good faith, and that the process was appropriate and reasonable in the circumstances." BC Hydro has made offers of accommodation to all of the Treaty 8 First Nations, and none of them have accepted yet those offers of accommodation. I am hopeful. You may think I'm naive. I'm maybe naive. I'm hopeful that as of today, when the Premier officially announces that we've made a final investment decision to go ahead with Site C, that some of those First Nations will decide that there are benefits to be had for their contracting businesses, their trucking firms, their logging firms, their construction companies, and that they will avail themselves of the opportunities that those firms have and their employees to get involved with this project. So we're not giving up. I want to be clear about that. We think that we need to work ever harder with First Nations in the Treaty 8 area, and we intend to do that. And it won't stop when construction starts, and it won't stop when construction ends. We have a duty, and we want to consult and accommodate First Nations everywhere in the province, and that includes the Treaty 8 First Nations.